Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 26th of November 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to the programme. Coming up, Maduro the terrorist.
A Venezuela no la va a detener ninguna guerra psicológica. Los derrotamos en la guerra psicológica y en la guerra económica. Venezuela lo que va es pa'lante.
Venezuela's President Nicolás Maduro there saying his country won't be deterred by psychological or economic warfare. But airlines are cancelling flights and Donald Trump has designated him and his allies as members of a terrorist organisation. We'll have more. Also ahead in the next 60 minutes.
Houston, we have a problem.
The astronauts' all-time understatement there. But since Apollo 13 drove us all to the edge of our seats, why are space missions going wrong so often in 2025? Plus, the EU plans to speed up the movement of arms and troops. We'll hear more about proposals for a so-called military Schengen programme. Plus the papers too, and the climate news. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Taiwan is to spend approximately $40 billion on drones, missile defence warnings. President Trump has defended his special envoy Steve Witkoff after a leaked audio recording appears to show Mr. Witkoff advising a Russian official on how to get on the right side of the president. And one of the late Pope Francis's Pope-mobiles has been repurposed and turned into a mobile clinic to be sent to Gaza to treat wounded children. It was reportedly the Pope's final wish. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, Venezuela is being isolated. At sea, there have been more than 20 strikes on vessels the US claim are transporting drugs. In the skies, airlines are cancelling flights. And in politics, President Nicolás Maduro, alongside his government allies, have been designated as members of a foreign terrorist organisation by the US. So what is Washington's desired result of all this? Well, to tell us more, I'm joined in the studio by Oscar Guardiola Rivera, who's a professor in international law and indeed international affairs at Birkbeck College here in London. Good morning, Oscar. Good to have you in the studio.
Good morning, Emma. It's so good to be here.
I'm so pleased that you're here. Niceties over. Is this Donald Trump's first direct attempt at regime change?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not the first time Donald Trump has expressed his desire and acted on his desire to get rid of Maduro. Back in when he was a president in 2016, it is said he did try to persuade the governments of Brazil and Colombia, who were friendly back then, to do so. But it was the generals of those two armies who persuaded their presidents that such an operation would be unthinkable. Now he's at it once more. Since August, Washington has amassed naval assets in the thousands, including the USS Gerald Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier. Has hit some 22 vessels, and these are, let us be clear, extrajudicial killings, illegal under international war. Some 83 civilians have been killed in the process, including, it seems, Colombian civilians, not just Venezuelans, without offering a shred of proof about, to support the claim that these are, drug trafficking operations. There is no proof. We have been offered no court-tested proof about even the existence of the so-called Cartel de los Soles, and every specialist on this in the planet will tell you that the claim that Nicolás Maduro, for all his faults and all his ills, is the boss of such a thing is simply a lie. So what does Trump want? Regime change and or the appearance of it.
And you mentioned there the Cartel de los Soles, which is the group that Washington has designated a terrorist organization, and including Nicolás Maduro, the president. I mean, who are they? They are, to all intents and purposes, a fairly unknown name if you're not working in that kind of part of the world. But they are they're parts of the armed forces, aren't they, who are linked to drug trafficking? I mean, how genuine a threat are they?
Well, they're not. Even the very existence of the so-called Cartel de los Soles is a matter of controversy. The director of the UN ODC, the UN Office for Drugs Enforcement, has pointed out that Venezuela plays at best a marginal role in drug trafficking. He pointed out that if we were to make comparisons, Guatemala is a much bigger and much more important route of passage for the drugs, and there are several organizations, Inside Crime, for instance, who point out that the existence of this cartel needs to be proven. But even if there are, and there may be links within the army with drug trafficking routes, drug trafficking works nowadays. The way these structures work are like networks. They're not pyramidal. And so the idea that you have a sort of, Bond-like villain at the top is fanciful. Even the Venezuelan opposition within Venezuela recognizes that this is an international political tool and a pretext for Trump not having to provide detailed explanations of this operation in Congress.
The things that are being put in place, the cancellation or the instructions to cancel airlines, for airlines to cancel their flights, the increasing buildup of forces in the sea, the designation as a terrorist organization. Is the Trump administration here trying to? Is it sort of setting the stage for a military operation? Or is this the Trump administration actually trying to go absolutely to the edge and trying to avoid sending in the troops here?
Well, you're very right in using the words setting the stage. That is what this is, first and foremost. This is exactly the kind of theatrical scenario, psychological warfare scenario that we have grown accustomed to when it comes to the Trump administration. There is big spectacle, but the problem is that as part of this spectacle, we may have bombs, we may have missiles, and in fact, we have already had extrajudicial killings. I mean, those 83 people who have been hit by missiles, look, they are civilians. They shouldn't be killed.
And the chances that Maduro will fall are what?
They're not very good. I mean, most experts on the ground would tell you that there are two scenarios here. Either Maduro's generals, react back at him and depose him, or else he opts for self-exile. The latter is very unlikely, and the former too, because there are very, very clear and deep ties between Maduro and the army. This is the way in which he has maintained himself in power.
So where does Maduro go to try to avoid attempts by the United States to change the regime. How important is oil now a bargaining chip?
Oil is the only bargaining chip that he has. But of course, that presumes that this is the only thing that Trump wants. I would accept that he sees oil as a bonus. But I'm not certain that this is all he wants. He wants to appear stronger before his base. We all know the travails that Trump has been going through internally. His polling numbers are going low. So this is what I believe comes first. But we are seeing moves not only in Venezuela but also in Colombia, where the president was also designated as part of the drug dealing network, and nobody believes that. And yet there are operations in motion in both countries to depose this government. So mid-term, long-term, he may have leaders more, ready to follow his commands.
Regionally, what are the implications? You mentioned Colombia, and also in the last few hours we've got Cuba calling this build-up of military forces in the Caribbean as a genuine threat to regional security. This slightly ironic rallying ground Nicolás Maduro for a man for all his faults is one thing. But were this to happen, were something to be sparked, what would happen in the region?
The implications would be terrible, and this is the reason why there has been such a chorus denouncing this operation. No one in the region supports Maduro. Gustavo Petro in Colombia does not support Maduro. He has said so himself. The same could be said for Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva. The problem is that if you look at the Colombian-Venezuelan border, for instance, this is an open border, a porous border, filled with money, filled with resources, and filled with organizations of all types that are already armed and highly dangerous. So the possibility of full destabilization in the region, particularly in that border, is very clear. This is not Panama. This is not the Isthmus of Panama. This is not some small territory that could be taken. Of course, you can send missiles, the Air Force. You can even perhaps get rid of Maduro in 2 weeks. But then you have the prospect of a, God knows, 20-year guerrilla warfare in the interior of the country. That would be hugely terrible for a region that had thought the years of gunboat diplomacy and U.S. intervention were over.
Oscar Guardiola Rivera from Birkbeck College, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. You're listening to The Globalist. Eight 12 a.m. in Brussels, 7:12 a.m. here in London. Now, when it comes to getting things done at speed, the European Union has a reputation for taking its time and going at its own pace, regardless of the urgency or indeed the need. It's emerged that at the moment, moving military equipment such as tanks or indeed mobilising troops takes months. So Brussels has responded with a plan. EU member states will have just 3 days in peacetime and 6 hours in emergencies to allow other European military troops and equipment to cross their borders. Well, to explain why and how this will work, I'm joined now by Jacob Parakilas, who's a research leader for RAND Europe's Defence and Security Research Group. Good morning, Jacob. What are the current hold-ups at the moment when it comes to trying to get tanks, troops from A to B?
So the issue here is that if you look at the force structure between Russia and NATO outweighs Russia in virtually all respects, but it's not evenly distributed. Russia can bring quite a lot of force to bear on NATO's eastern flank, and the NATO forces that are available on the sort of eastern frontier would be outnumbered in the event of some kind of conflict or crisis with Russia. They would be outnumbered. So in order to bring the forces up to parity, you would need to bring troops over from Germany, from France, from the UK, from Italy and Spain, and from the United States across the European continent in order to shore up those forces and defend or, if necessary, liberate European territory or EU or NATO territory. And of course, the problem there is that if you are, say, in France and Poland calls for aid and France says, we will answer, you can't just hop in your 60-ton AMX 56 Leclerc main battle tank and put on your Spotify road trip playlist and drive east until people start shooting at you. You have to bring an enormous amount of stuff with you. Fighting a modern war against a modern opponent like Russia, you have to have armored vehicles of various types. You need radars, you need anti-aircraft defenses, you need infantry carriers, you need logistical vehicles, you need bridging equipment, and so on and so forth. It's a truly enormous list of stuff that you need to bring to be able to fight effectively a modern conventional war. And most of this stuff is extremely fuel hungry and extremely heavy. So again, if you just got into your armored vehicles and started driving, first of all, you would use almost all of your available fuel supplies just to get to the front. You would have the problem that a lot of the vehicles would break down after a 1,000-kilometer road march. You would have the problem that the crews, if you've ever been in a military vehicle, you'll know they're not designed for comfort. So driving 1,000 kilometers in them, you would arrive out of fuel, some of your vehicles broken down, crews exhausted before even fighting. So what you want to do is to put this stuff on the backs of specialized trucks with low loader trailers or rail cars and whisk it across Europe so it can be unloaded relatively close to the front and arrive in good shape with crews ready to fight. And that's made difficult by the fact that you're crossing a number of national borders. And also, as you get closer to the eastern frontier, you may be crossing into areas where the train tracks are not the same gauge. So you would need to, if necessary, take stuff off the trains and put them onto Soviet gauge trains, which are still in use in parts of Eastern Europe in order to get close enough to the front. And that doesn't even get into all the administrative complexities and the legal complexities of carrying what is frankly often hazardous cargo on civilian infrastructure.
So how much will this new plan simplify things?
Well, if the plan is executed as it is designed, as what the EU has released about it, it will make it faster. They're talking about getting it down to 3 days rather than weeks for the regulatory clearance. So if you are a French unit and you are trying to cross the German border, at the moment you might have to wait for some weeks while the Germans certify all the equipment that you're carrying and ensure that what you're doing isn't going to endanger the users of the German rail or road network. And this is supposed to sort of both give European countries a maximum of 3 days to issue those approvals in peacetime, or as you said before, 6 hours in the event of wartime, to have a kind of emergency system where those regulations can be not sidelined, but sort of temporarily reduced or deactivated so that in the event of emergency, all that equipment, all those troops, all that armament can very quickly move to where it needs to go in order to fight where it needs to fight.
Briefly, Jacob, the more political side of this is it's not just logistics. This has got to do with getting countries to effectively do as they're told at speed. If you have certain countries which might, let's say, slow down or block the movement of military equipment and troops, how much is this the European Union trying to pull countries in step without actually imposing a more overarching military strategy?
Well, the interesting thing about this is that everyone thinks this is a good idea in principle. You know, the Americans are supportive. No one has objected in principle, as far as I'm aware, to the idea of speeding the ability of military equipment and personnel to, especially in the event of emergencies, cross borders faster, especially where, and there does seem to be, there is some money behind sort of infrastructure upgrades, which will have civilian benefits as well to facilitate that. The devil, as always, is in the details. You know, there will be specific regulatory harmonization things which are complicated and which require quite a lot of attention, which is why the sort of prospective date for this is 2030, because it's all well and good to say, right, it's an emergency, we're opening up the border, bring your train full of tanks and anti-tank missiles and anti-aircraft guns across, no worries. And in the event, if the balloon went up, if there were a proper sudden crisis, you could imagine there being a sort of, we're just going to agree to not follow these regulations because we all accept it's a crisis. But at that point, it might be too late. So it is really a question of trying to get ahead belatedly of the crisis and trying to sort of harmonize those regulations. Fortunately, that's something the EU has quite a lot of experience doing over time.
Jacob Parakoulis from RAND Europe, thank you for joining us. Still to come.
The crucial point here is the budget vote. If the budget doesn't pass, then that means election in June.
We'll ask, how long has Benjamin Netanyahu really got left in power? Stay with us on The Globalist.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office Houseview, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's have a look at today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Terry Stiasny, political journalist and author of Believable Lies, The Misfits Who Fought Churchill's Secret Propaganda War. Good morning, Terry.
Good morning.
You've done a lot of heavy lifting today. It's budget day here in the United Kingdom. Can we escape the varied haircuts of Rachel Reeves and the varied plans that we do not know that what she's going to reveal later on today?
Yes, I think this is an unusual budget because I can't remember a British budget that has been so heavily trailed ahead of time. I mean, there used to be a convention here in the UK that there was something called budget purdah, where chancellors and other government ministers did not say anything about what was going to be in the budget, and it was practically a resigning matter to do so. But Rachel Reeves has had to sort of say, she was thinking of raising income tax, and then she wasn't thinking of raising income tax anymore. And on all the front pages today, so talking about the FT is talking about the four audiences that she has to try to satisfy with this budget, which are her own MPs, the financial markets, the business community, and, of course, the rest of us, the public.
Yes, at the end of that comes British people. The interesting thing about this is that there's a sense that this hasn't been sort of leaked maliciously, that these it's been a sort of very public game of trial and error, that one wonders how much the media have been briefed by number 11 Downing Street to say, we're thinking of doing this. Let's try that and see how people react.
Yes, but these are really big things that they've been thinking. I mean, we know that one of the main things was the suggestion that they would have to raise income tax rates, which is something that, hasn't been done for about 50 years. It's something the government had promised in its manifesto not to do it. But now they've sort of backtracked on that and said, we're not going to raise income tax rates, but we're going to have to still, to balance the books, raise lots of other smaller taxes. And that's the big question. They decided obviously not to take this big political hit by saying we're putting everybody's income tax up. But then they are probably going to tax other things like expensive houses, like pensions. And although they are trying, as the Times and other papers are reporting today, to balance this on the other side by saying, people with children who are on benefits will do better. They will be allowed to have benefits if they have more than 2 children, that the minimum wage will go up. And they are trying to sort of load this to benefit people on lower incomes and tax people, on higher incomes in a progressive sense. This is still going to be quite a difficult thing to do. And looking at the front pages sort of across the piece this morning, a lot of the papers pretty unhappy saying, Rachel Reeves still going to increase most people's taxes rather than people seeing the benefits of it.
Indeed, and we look forward to all that happening later on this afternoon. Let's move to France. Emmanuel Macron, again, playing with ideas. It seems to be the way that the senior politicians do now. They chuck out a tricky idea and see if it sticks. This is about the issue of national service, isn't it? It's been around for about 24 hours. And Macron is having to say, we want to bring people back into military service, but we're not going to send you to the border. We're not going to send you to Ukraine.
Yes, Macron is he's trying to do two different things here. On the one hand, having this big call with the so-called coalition of the willing, with Keir Starmer and others talking about what a multinational force in Ukraine might potentially look like. And then, yes, as you say, having done an interview on Tuesday where he'd said we're going to have some kind of a national voluntary military service, so not going back to compulsory military service service like they had in France up until 1997. But then he's going to have to give a big speech on this on Thursday, where he's talking about wanting to have 50,000 volunteers each year. But then really having to emphasize, this does not mean, people must not get this confused idea which consists in saying that we're going to send our young people to Ukraine. But you can kind of see where people might get this idea. If on the one hand you're suggesting it would be a really good idea if people did some kind of military service which would increase over time, 10 months would be paid, for instance. What else is the point of it? I mean, yes, there are lots of other arguments for military service, but it seems a strange time to be announcing it.
Indeed. And what is the purpose of it? The idea that to bring back some sort of national unity is something that Macron has been craving, not least within his own parliament.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that many countries often float, the idea that, if he brought back some kind of national service, it would be, good for young people to give them skills. It would give people more of a sense of community. But I think, the army heads also suggesting that, well, maybe we do need people trained up just in case we need them. And we've seen that quite widely in Europe with other countries saying, well, look, maybe this is a thing that we need to think about again.
And just talking a little bit more about the response to Ukraine, the coalition of the willing is currently sort of standing by to see what's going to happen today, because Steve Witkoff is in Moscow. He's giving the peace plan to Putin. Other US senior figures are in talking to Ukrainians, saying this is the peace plan. And in the wings is this so-called coalition of the willing working whether to jump next.
Yes, and it's quite interesting that with this phone call with Macron and Keir Starmer and others, Marco Rubio was on this call as well. And obviously we can speculate about, what Marco Rubio's own particular position is, given that other people are doing a lot of the negotiating. But the French are arguing certainly that this would give a new coherence, having a task force to these transatlantic talks, and suggesting that, perhaps the US are bought into this. But a lot of analysts suggesting that, is this a dangerous thing to try to do, to have other countries not backed by the US, suggesting that they're going to be able to create some kind of force, and whether they're really able to do it.
Finally, let's talk about the most disappointing thing. A Canadian author at aged 82 discovers he's not Indigenous, and as a result he has to withdraw his next novel.
Yes, this is a really interesting story, and a lot of different perspectives on this. It came out of a story which was originally in the Toronto Globe and Mail, has been reported elsewhere in the UK in the Telegraph. So Thomas King, who is a Canadian-American writer who is 82 and had believed that because his mother told him that he and his brother were part Cherokee biologically, he'd written a lot about his ancestry. He had, written about Indigenous communities. But he has been told, after sort of rumours went round among other members of the Indigenous community, that he was not, in fact, Cherokee as he believed. He has now had to say no, that his genealogical research into his background shows that he isn't part Cherokee, and he's been sort of asked to apologise for it. But he says, well, I'm not going to apologise for my life, because an apology assumes a crime, an offence, a misdeed, in his words. But he says he has always conducted himself in the belief that he was mixed blood Cherokee. And I think it's really interesting looking on CBC, the Canadian broadcaster, at some of the responses from people who are members of Indigenous communities. They say that actually they're not shocked by this. They believed, that these stories had been going around for a while. But I think it's just a really interesting question, because if he genuinely believed that he had Cherokee heritage, although he'd grown up partly in the States and hadn't grown up speaking Cherokee or in the community in that sense, was he doing anything wrong to represent himself as that, if that's what he genuinely believed himself to be? Whereas a lot of the Cherokee writers are saying, well, maybe it's time to listen to people who have written from that perspective, who have grown up in that community, and suggesting there's lots of other, perhaps slightly less well-known writers as well that people should be reading.
Terry Stasny, thank you as ever for whizzing through the papers for us. You're listening to The Globalist. Now, a quick look at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. Taiwan is to spend $40 billion on drones, missiles and defence warning systems. The government says it's in response to China stepping up its military preparations to take the island by force. President Trump has defended his special envoy Steve Witkoff after a leaked audio recording appears to show Mr. Witkoff advising a Russian official on how to get on the president's good side. Meanwhile, Mr. Witkoff is to meet Russia's President Putin to finalise a peace plan to end the war in Ukraine. Senior US figures will also be meeting officials from Ukraine at the same time. And one of the late Pope Francis's Pope-mobiles has been repurposed and is turned into a mobile clinic. It'll be sent to Gaza to treat wounded children. It was reportedly the Pope's final wish. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now, Aleph Ben is one of Israel's most seasoned observers, a journalist, author and the editor-in-chief of the liberal daily Haaretz. Well, earlier this month, he wrote a piece for Foreign Affairs examining how Benjamin Netanyahu might yet survive being pushed from the Prime Minister's office. Monocle's contributing editor, Andrew Muller, caught up with Ben to talk through his argument. And Andrew began by asking him whether, with the war in Gaza now nearing its end, Netanyahu is in fact any closer to losing his job.
Well, in Israel, it's coalition governments. It's a multi-party system. It's always on the verge of collapse at any given point. And Netanyahu is facing several crises in his coalition. The most difficult one is with his ultra-Orthodox partners who are now like half and half inside the coalition and out of government because they want Netanyahu to legislate a new bill that would once and for all legalize the draft exemption of ultra-Orthodox boys in Israel, which is anathema to large parts of the population that is drafted, which includes seculars and national religious. The national religious are also part of the coalition, and many of them are also involved or play a very important role in the career military, in the command and control system, etc. So there is anger at Netanyahu. He could not survive without the ultra-Orthodox, but it's very difficult to find a norm that would satisfy both the ultra-Orthodox rabbis and the law of the land, because the Supreme Court of Israel ruled that the government should enforce the draft on the ultra-Orthodox youth who draft orders. So that's the most difficult thing for Netanyahu. And the crucial point here is the budget vote. If the budget doesn't pass, then that means election in June. If he's able somehow to cross all these bridges, then the government will survive and the election would be in October.
Is it possible to gauge whether or not 2 years of war have made him any less popular? Because he had considerable domestic difficulties before the war started, the demonstrations against his judicial reforms, the criminal proceedings against him, and there were those that blamed him for the apparent derelictions of October 7th as well, the fact that Israel's military seemed to be caught napping. Have the 2 years since then atoned for all of that?
Well, quite amazingly, shortly after the last election, 3 years ago, when Netanyahu's government announced the judicial reform, which we call the judicial upheaval or coup, it lost its popularity in public opinion surveys. It went further down shortly after October 7, but when Israel turned the tide in the war and bombed Iran, and before that assassinated the leader of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and forced a ceasefire in the Lebanese front, it gained back the pre-war popularity, and since then it's been amazingly stable, which it's 51, 52 in the mainstream polls out of 61. But the thing is that the opposition is very fractured. It is too afraid to reach out to the Arab parties that are considered anathema by them, as well as by the current coalition. And as long as that's the case, the opposition fails to show that it would be able to put together a majority government after an election. Now, this is enough for Netanyahu, because if there's a stalemate and nobody could put together a coalition after an election, he will stay on at the head of the caretaker government. To him, a draw is enough to survive. The opposition must first put together its act, agree on a common leader, agree on a platform. The opposition is composed of several parties with very different agendas besides anti-Netanyahu. And apparently that's not enough. And that's why I believe, and this is what I put in my Foreign Affairs piece, that Netanyahu has a solid chance to win the election.
Are there other potential hazards awaiting Netanyahu between now and whenever the next election is? And it has to be by October at the latest. Is it possible, for example, that the further away in the memory the war gets, the methods used during that war might become less popular or less acceptable to Israelis, especially after or if international reporters are allowed into Gaza?
I'm not sure, because I think the main concern for Netanyahu is less international condemnation of what happened or is still happening in Gaza, and more the drive towards even a discussion or a debate or diplomacy around a Palestinian statehood. Netanyahu spent his entire career to fight the idea of a Palestinian state, and his coalition is strongly unified and his voters against that idea. And just bear in mind that in the last months of the war, since Israel breached the ceasefire back in March, all the way through the Trump-imposed ceasefire in the late summer, all that while, Netanyahu's coalition was dreaming about annexation of Gaza, formal annexation of the West Bank, transfer or depopulating Gaza and expelling its Palestinian inhabitants elsewhere. All this is gone, and now Trump is quoting the Saudi crown prince, who just visited Washington, and the Saudi crown prince conditions any progress vis-a-vis making peace with Israel or normalizing relations. He preconditions everything on progress towards Palestinian statehood. Now, this really undermines the most basic tenets of the Netanyahu government, the foundations of Netanyahu's policy. And this is a much bigger concern for him than what could they do to him? Another arrest warrant in The Hague. I mean, those people who think that Netanyahu is a mass murderer responsible for genocide in Gaza are not going to change their mind either way if and when they see more picture or get more reporting in Gaza. And Israeli public opinion, the Jewish public opinion in Israel, the mainstream opinion is that Palestinians had it coming. Israeli Jews are very, very traumatized after the October 7th attack by Hamas. The Israeli media is just rerunning the stories about the attack, about the kibbutzim, about looting, about raping, about killing, the stories of the hostages who came back and tell about the torture and sexual assault they went through in Hamas captivity. So I don't see that Israeli public opinion worries much about any new disclosures about killing, the devastation, or torture of Palestinians in Gaza.
That was Aleph Ben, editor-in-chief of Haaretz, talking to Andrew Muller. You're listening to Monocle Radio. .37 in Beijing, 8:37 a.m. if you're listening in Zurich. Good morning to you if you are. Now, why do astronauts get stuck in space? Last year, Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore spent 9 months more than they intended to when the Boeing Starliner capsule designed to bring them from the International Space Station broke down. And as we speak, an uncrewed Chinese spacecraft is on its way to rescue 3 astronauts stranded on the Tiangong space station. What is going wrong? Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now by David Whitehouse, space scientist and author. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
Right. Could you just tell us what is happening at the moment with the Chinese space station?
Well, the Shenzhou 22 replacement lifeboat spacecraft has arrived and just docked so that the crew have a means of getting home now safely. But what they have to do before they return is to carry out a spacewalk to inspect the damage on the previous craft that was deemed too unsafe to bring them back to Earth. So they have to do that. It's a bit worrying as to what the damage was. But in a way, it does show that China has its act together in terms of managing human spaceflight. Because as you said, Butch and Sunny were in space when their Starliner was damaged for best part of a year before they were able to come home. China's been able to send up a replacement spacecraft that was due to be launched next year many months earlier and get on top of this problem far quicker than the United States did when they had theirs.
That suggests that they are not only able to anticipate problems from happening, but there is a sense that problems are likely to happen. I mean, are we looking at a pattern here, or are we just observing people trying to fix things as they go along, as everybody does in life yet on Earth?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, because one of the reasons to be in space is to live and work in space and to overcome the problems of things failing, of things breaking, things being damaged, and keeping the crew alive and functioning. But it was slightly worrying that this was a piece of space junk that damaged the Shenzhou spacecraft's window. This is going to happen from time to time, and some people think it will happen more often in the future unless we get to grips with the space junk problem. But worryingly for the Chinese engineers, that this hit a window and it cracked the window. Now, you would expect, depending upon how bad the collision was, you would expect them to be able to produce a window that would not crack as much as it did. And the reason they had to send up a replacement crack is they did tests on the ground, and they were very worried this crack would spread during re-entry and cause catastrophic failure. So, first of all, they'll want a spacewalk to look at the damage in close detail, to see exactly what happened and try and work out what hit the spacecraft. But they'll also have to redesign the window and make sure that it doesn't succumb to a problem like this. But all this goes to show that China really has got to grips with human spaceflight, and there are some analysts who believe it's only a few years away from being on a par with the Americans.
And we're just talking more generally about working out what is going to work and what's not going to work. Given the fact that we have had so many, and we do still have so many trips up into space, simply fixing a window, or rather simply designing a window that doesn't crack when it gets smacked, is something that one would imagine would be sort of inbuilt into the preparation and the design of anything nowadays that's going to be sent up to space. So are we still in a position where we're still getting panicked by a cracked window?
We're still learning a lot about living in space, and you're quite right. The specifications for the space station, both China's and the International Space Station, and the craft that fly to and from it are very strict indeed. So that's why they want to know what type of thing hit this craft, because it may be a very, very unusual event, which they still have to build into the future to be resilient against. There are often small debris collisions with, say, the International Space Station, and it's designed to take them. But it's the ones that aren't regular and small that you really have to take notice of and learn from. So this may be a problem in the future, or they may decide, well, we need to up the spec on the windows, but it's unlikely to happen in the future. We don't really know, but certainly given the sophistication of the spacecraft and the systems on board, it does seem a little surprising that a cracked window would cause this much concern, but knowing the Chinese, it's not going to happen again.
And you mentioning there, obviously, the suggestion that the Chinese are moving apace when it comes to developments in space travel. In the United States, it's a different story because we now have the involvement of so many parts from the private sector. How does that change the pace? And actually, how does that also change the risk when you actually bring in other experts from other companies? You don't have a centralised approach to solving a problem or to designing a spacecraft, or indeed does actually that make the interchange of ideas better?
It's a very interesting question. Certainly China is learning from America, and although everything is state-run, they're really trying to have individual companies have their own pitches, have their own ideas and own contributions to their state-run effort, because they looked across at America and they saw that the revolution that was SpaceX now is 25 years old, and it revolutionized the United States space effort. Before that, it was run by large heritage companies that cost a great deal of money. SpaceX came along and said, look, don't don't give us large contracts initially. We'll do it commercially. We'll pay our way. We'll develop our own technology. And they took over the business. The main spacecraft that takes crew up to the International Space Station is the Dragon capsule. SpaceX designed, excellent design, new vision, new design. It does the job excellently. So China looks at this and says, well, that is the way to go. The problem with the United States, as you intimate, is that now it has so many different participants. It has NASA, of course, it has SpaceX, it has Boeing, and it has Blue Origin as well. And it's got itself into a bit of a pickle with meshing all these together and getting them to work together, for instance, to go back to the moon. So although the United States is in an incredibly strong position and is still the world's leading space power, and SpaceX is more capable than NASA when it comes to sending astronauts into space, there are some problems for the future with the very fact that it has been so successful.
David Whitehouse, space scientist and author, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's hear the latest from the world of climate news. Sheena Rossiter is Monocle's contributing editor based in Edmonton in Canada. Good evening, Sheena.
Yes, and good morning to you.
We're trying to just sort of do a bit of a mop-up on COP30. And I think it can only be fairly described that the hangover has been pretty massive on what many have seen as not a success, have seen a bit of a disappointment.
Yeah, well, despite being held on the edge of the Amazon rainforest, so number one, very little was spoken about deforestation. But what is actually more critical that came out of, or actually didn't come out of, this COP conference at the end was that there's still no firm plans to phase out fossil fuels. So climate scientists have been saying for years that it's absolutely urgent and necessary to have this plan to phase out fossil fuels because burning fossil fuels is one of the leading causes of climate change. And to quote Ed Miliband, a climate deal without explicit language calling for fossil fuel phase out, it's like having a ceasefire without language that's calling for the suspension of hostilities. That was said by a climate scientist, Michael E. Mann, who posted that on Blue Sky. And a lot has been done or is trying to get done in the 10 years since the signing of the Paris Climate Accord, but we're still seeing rising emissions. So it's really vital that this actually happens.
Any sign, though, that there were positive aspects despite the general consensus that the most important thing, the phasing out of fossil fuels, was not explicitly mentioned?
Well, there were a few positives. So as we know, this is annually held and has been held for the past 30 years. So at the end of this climate conference, which went on for an extra day because of bad weather that was happening in the area, the one success was that developing countries will get $125 billion US per year to fight climate change. And that number has tripled from before, but is still well below the $300 billion figure that was asked in the past. However, this deadline has been pushed now to 2030. And to quote Jasper Inventor, the deputy program director of Greenpeace International, he said that COP30, it did start with the ambition. Everybody thought that this would be the COP where things are going to happen and things are going to be different from what's happened in the past. But it started with ambition and it ended with a whimper of disappointment. And we definitely saw that with the lack of change that happened on the fossil fuels phasing out and no agreements on that front.
Why indeed is it so important that getting an agreement in phasing out fossil fuels is so important? It seems quite obvious, but it does merit an explanation.
Yeah, well, fossil fuels burning is one of the key sources for rising temperatures and climate change. And this put simply, impacts billions of people around the world. This wasn't possible to achieve at this COP meeting, and we're really running out of time. So without time to really limit that warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius, it's going to cost the economy globally billions of US dollars. And if it goes beyond that 1.5 degrees rising of pre-industrial levels, we will have serious risk. And that means more heat waves, more droughts, and just on a large scale, more natural disasters that we're all going to experience. And that's going to cost everybody.
So in that very clear context, what was it that stopped a plan from being put in place?
Well, one of the big reasons was there was a large absence of major political leaders. The United States was largely absent. President Donald Trump didn't attend, nor did he send any form of delegation from his administration. But there was a small delegation, about 100 local delegates were reported to be there, including the California governor, Gavin Newsom. Now, what is shocking is that there are reports that North Korea did have a delegation and the United States didn't. But other large players and large polluters like China and India were also absent. So President Xi Jinping did not attend COP30, nor did Prime Minister Modi of India. Instead, they sent different delegates. In India's case, they sent the ambassador to Brazil, and they sent the vice premier in China's case. Also, Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, didn't attend. So this is really important that some of these big players, when they're not at the table, how can you really get a climate deal done to help phase out fossil fuels, namely without the United States in particular?
And indeed, how can you even begin to think for next year?
Well, yeah, what's really showing is that if these big world leaders aren't attending COP, it's kind of showing that there's becoming this clear divide between world leaders and nations that are following the climate science and the suggestions from these climate scientists on how to combat climate change. But then you're also seeing some nations that are actively fighting against it. So, for example, now the US is really at odds with some 90 countries, including several EU countries that are really on board with trying to phase out fossil fuels and have more green energy. But as we do see the rise of far-right politics happening in certain places, including in some European nations, it's showing that maybe COP is kind of falling a bit out of fashion. And it was very telling that President Trump was dealing with Russia and Saudi Arabia instead of actually going to COP during that negotiations there in Brazil.
How does, when you were reporting on all this, what does the journalism world do about this, given the fact that there are very deliberate attempts for it not to be on the agenda? And when you don't have the likes of Donald Trump and Narendra Modi at the meeting, there's a sense that it will be slipping down the news agenda.
Yeah, that is a really interesting thing, is that are people just getting fatigued of these meetings? Do they really accomplish what they need to accomplish? Because if we've passed yet another COP meeting and we haven't reached agreements on how to phase out fossil fuels, those do come into question. And as the UN is about to turn 80 next year, there have been questions that are coming up. Well, are some of the policies that are in place from these COP meetings, namely where any country can veto, are they working in this different political environment that we're finding ourselves in 80 years on? And this is really frustrating for some smaller nations that are really largely present. So it's going to look to see if there's going to be an inevitable break with these conference of the parties. Are we going to keep having these? And are they really making a difference for things as we move towards renewable power? It is a lot cheaper to have renewable power, but without having important players at the table, are we going to be able to accomplish what we need when we don't have those large superpowers like India, China, and the US at the table to negotiate these important agreements? And they're not willing to agree with them.
Sheena Rossiter, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Edmonton. You're listening to The Globalist. It is 15:53 in Singapore, which is where we head to now, to the World Robot Olympiad, to tell us everything. Adam Hancock is a journalist covering Southeast Asia. He is in Singapore at the moment. Good afternoon, Adam.
Hello, good afternoon.
So tell us about the World Robot Olympiad. What is it?
Yeah, it's effectively a little bit like the Olympics for young people who are involved in robotics. It's a huge competition. It's going to take place over the next 3 days in Singapore. Participants from more than 95 countries will be involved. And there's a whole host of challenges for people who are competing. It's things like robo sports. So some of the robots will play tennis, missions where robots are challenged to go and complete tasks, and that you have to guide your robot to complete a mission. And then also innovation as well. And really the Olympiad is kind of more about taking part than winning as such, in terms of it's about getting young people interested in robotics and getting them creative and trying to come up with ways that they can use robots to solve big global issues. So it's a bit more open-ended, really, the kind of future innovations theme of the Olympiad. And it's challenging people to look at some of the biggest problems we face, problems with the environment, aging populations, waste, things like this, and trying to work out ways that robots and AI and new technology can be used to compete against them. So it's not as much of a competition in that respect. It's more about inspiring young people to get involved with robotics and design and engineering.
So how do they join the dots? Because on the face of it, I'm not 100% sure what problem a tennis-playing robot solves. However, there is clearly a reason behind this, not just to have fun and actually inspire young people.
Yeah, so I think things like the kind of the competitions and the challenges, they are more about getting people involved in kind of a fun way. It's a good way to market robots and get people thinking about it. Whereas I think the Olympiad are actually a lot more interested in these innovations and getting young people to think outside the box and think of ways of solving problems. So this year, for example, the Future Innovators category, there'll be 3 awards rather than just 1 award. And previous years, a team from Venezuela, they won because they created a robot that was solving problems around clean water, and it was looking to clean lagoons and make it safe and drinkable water. There's been other teams that have put forward, AI solutions about aging populations and things like that. So it's more, I think for the event, it's more important that these kind of bigger issues, we're looking at how robots can seamlessly fit into our lives and solve problems that we face every day. And then the other stuff, the missions and the sport, is more a bit of fun and more a thing for people to just get involved with and have a bit of fun with, really.
One thing that obviously we're super interested in here at Monocle, apart from those tennis players, is the idea of how it can be applied practically in a city context. And you talked about making mobility for old people and finding genuine moments of innovation. Where are robots now becoming the great support of urbanism?
Well, it's huge, really. I mean, this whole concept of smart cities is massive now. I mean, it's appropriate that this has been held in Singapore. It leads the way when it comes to global smart cities. The government all the time want to use technology, robotics to integrate into daily life. And it can be a whole variety of things. I mean, you get the kind of fun things in Singapore. So you might be at a restaurant and there's a robotic waiter who comes and takes your plates, or you might be at the airport and there's robots cleaning, and there's also robot police as well. But there's also things that you would think about a bit less as well. So, for example, autonomous vehicles going around the city, obviously reducing accidents, navigating the streets, drone delivery systems, completely revolutionizing the logistics industry, and also things as well like Singapore has an aging population, and robotic support is something that's been considered a lot more. Robots that can provide care, companionship, can help with rehabilitation from injuries. So there's all these little things where robots are being used to kind of just seamlessly integrate into our lives and improve cities and make them safer, make them more efficient, make them more sustainable. And then there's also things where they're using AI to model digital twins of cities, and then they can take a look at planning. If we build something here, how will that affect the rest of the city? How will climate change affect the city? So there's all these little ways where AI robots are just slowly starting to integrate. And it's fantastic that this event is actually being held in Singapore, because it's leading the way in this, really.
Adam Hancock in Singapore, thank you so much for joining us on the line. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers, Christy O'Grady and Chris Chermak. Our researcher was Joanna Moser and our studio manager was Steph Chungu. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Advice is our craft.